Bueno, buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos al Centro Universitario La Salle y al Instituto Bíblico y Oriental, con motivo de la visita del profesor Israel Finkelstein a esta conferencia. Les agradecemos su asistencia y en especial le agradecemos a él que haya tenido a bien ofrecernos esta conferencia. So I would like to welcome Israel to the Salle University and the Biblical and Oriental Institute. We are very honored to have you among us and grateful to have the opportunity to listen to you and share the latest work at Kiriath-jearim. So welcome and thank you very much. Quisiera también presentar en segundo lugar a la doctora Cayetana Johnson, que será quien conduzca el acto. Cayetana es buena amiga y colaboradora del Instituto Bíblico, además de profesora en la Universidad Eclesiástica San Dámaso de Madrid. A ella le hemos pedido, como arqueóloga, que es también desde 1995-96 en Tel Hatzor y desde hace unos años en la ciudad de David, que presente un poquito la trayectoria de Finkelstein, así que dedicará unos minutos a presentarlo y después tendremos la intervención y habrá un tiempo breve de preguntas, ¿de acuerdo? Este será el esquema del acto. Bienvenidos a todos.
Sí, se me oye ahora, ¿no? Pues sí, me uno también al agradecimiento y al honor, ¿no?, que supone presentar a un gran arqueólogo, un gran profesional y un hombre sabio, Israel Finkelstein. De verdad que es un gran placer y sobre todo porque desde que publicó aquella Biblia desenterrada se convirtió en el enfant terrible, ¿no?, de la arqueología bíblica, pero también con razón, porque realmente cuando uno lee sus trabajos se da cuenta, ¿no?, del nivel de profundidad, de análisis y de comentario, ¿no?, que también sirve, ¿no?, para aportar, no restar en todo nuestro mundo de la arqueología. También es un magnífico director de las excavaciones de Megiddo, tanto en su lado cananeo, todo lo que es la era de bronce, como también, ¿no?, en esta época tan difícil de lo que supone el asentamiento de Israel en el antiguo Canaán. Y la verdad que es una ciudad que merece la pena visitarse y comprender todo el trabajo maravilloso que hay detrás y el gran esfuerzo. Actualmente el profesor Finkelstein es catedrático emérito de la Universidad de Tel Aviv por el Departamento de Arqueología y también de las civilizaciones del Próximo Oriente Antiguo y al mismo tiempo, pues según has estado comentando afuera, en una charla muy agradable, ¿no?, poniéndonos también en contexto que es su vida ahora, pues le han nombrado director en diversos proyectos, ¿no?, relacionados con la Universidad de Haifa y sobre todo en la Escuela de Arqueología. También quiere desarrollar proyectos de protección, ¿no?, del patrimonio arqueológico de Israel, que también es otro paso, ¿no?, necesario, ¿no?, para todo lo que se está excavando en Israel. Y hoy le vamos a tener en una charla magnífica por los informes que he ido leyendo, ¿no?, con su colega de excavación, Tomás Romer, y la verdad que es un yacimiento prometedor que también nos va a contextualizar lo que es este momento del traslado del Arca de la Alianza en manos de David, el rey David, hacia Jerusalén, y los años que estuvo allí en este punto de Kiriath-jearim, que ya tiene sus referencias bíblicas en el libro de Samuel, en 1 Samuel 7 y en 1 Crónicas 13. Este yacimiento o este punto también está compartiendo el espacio con el convento de las Hermanas de San José de la Aparición. Es una orden francesa que lleva instalada desde que se fundó en el siglo XVIII, y este convento es muy especial porque se llama el convento del Arca de la Alianza, ¿no? Entonces están ahí las hermanitas en un territorio también protegido y amparado por el gobierno francés desde que se iniciara el actual Estado de Israel, y él mismo, ¿no?, el profesor Finkelstein nos ha estado comentando, ¿no?, la excelente relación que tiene con las hermanitas del convento, cómo han colaborado, cómo han contribuido, y también, ¿no?, la curiosidad que la larga trayectoria, ¿no?, que motivó el asentamiento de este convento, cuyas referencias también más antiguas las vamos a tener en Eusebio de Cesarea, el biógrafo de Constantino el Grande, que ya hace una referencia, ¿no?, a este punto de Kiriath-jearim, más los trabajos que también le han servido muchísimo muchísimo al profesor Finkelstein, que iniciaron en el año 95 con Gaby Barjay, y después ha habido una continuación con Amir Feldstein en los años 80 y ya más reciente en el año 2013 con Boaz Zissou y McKinney. Entonces, gracias a todos esos trabajos previos, pues finalmente el profesor Israel Finkelstein ha podido abrir un señor yacimiento con unos descubrimientos realmente espectaculares que hoy nos va a exponer de una manera también espectacular, porque él es un gran comunicador y de verdad que van a disfrutar, ¿no?, con la ponencia del profesor Finkelstein. Toda Rabá Israel.
Okay, so good evening. I'm very happy to be here and to be presenting the results of the excavations at Kiriath-jearim near Jerusalem. I haven't been in Madrid for a long time, so it's good to be back, and that it's good to be back in Spain. In any event, we here in this picture you have a nice overview of the site of Kiriath-jearim, which is located about 10 kilometers to the west of Jerusalem. On top of the mound, the convent, the monastery of the Ark, which was established in the beginning of the 20th century, about a century ago, and it is built on top of remains of a Byzantine monastery, which probably commemorated the events described in the Bible in the first book of Samuel. And this is a large mound, one of the largest sites in the highlands, in the hill country of the region of Jerusalem, which has not been excavated yet. And this was one of the reasons why to go and try to excavate at the site. The excavation at the site, I'm not doing this alone. Here you have a nice picture of the three of us running the show, running the excavations. I'm sitting here first and foremost with my very good and dear friend, Thomas Romer, with a white shirt. He is a biblical scholar. He is now the president of the Collège de France and a very prominent biblical scholar, possibly one of the, or probably one of the most important living today with us. And Thomas and me have been good friends for many years now. We have cooperated in many projects, published articles together, published a book in France, in French together 2 or 3 years ago. And it's been a big pleasure to work with Thomas Romer at Kiriath-jearim. And together, sitting with us here is Christophe Nicole, who is an archaeologist with the CNRS in France, and he is on the archaeology side of the French part of the expedition to Kiriath-jearim. So here's a nice, beautiful picture, I think. Yeah, it's well on the screen. A beautiful picture of Kiriath-jearim, now looking to the south, and you can see the different components of the convent, of the monastery. There's the monastery itself, the convent itself on top of the hill. Then there is the church to the east, and then there is the hostel there. And those of you who have not been there, I strongly recommend you to visit, because it's a very nice place indeed. And the site, as you can see, is very well protected, because it is the property of the church. It is the property of the convent. The land was purchased from the villagers around during the Ottoman period, in the very beginning of the 20th century. And in fact, the first excavation there was carried out in the very beginning of the century by French archaeologists who were interested mainly with the Byzantine monastery there. Now, you can see in the box on the right-hand side the location vis-a-vis Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So the site, Tel Aviv, is on the coast there, a little bit to the northwest. And the site is located on the main highway, which connects Jerusalem with Tel Aviv also today, and also in antiquity, the main road, which you can see in the background here. Now, the mound is one of the biggest mounds in the highlands. It covers an area of about 5 hectares, something like that, 4.5, 5 hectares. Please remember that, let's say Jerusalem, according to my understanding at least, Jerusalem before the 8th century was not much bigger than this one. So this is relatively big for the highlands, and this is the only mound in the highlands big in this size, that has not been excavated, has not been, I mean, it has been, as you heard before, it has been surveyed, and there was also a salvage excavation there in the 90s, but there has never been a big operation at the site. Now, the identification of this place with Kiriath-jearim is secure. There is no question about it. You know that there are other places in the country where the identification is not as secure, but this one is an easy case for several reasons. First of all, the description of the tribal boundaries in the book of Joshua, the boundary between the territory of the tribe of Benjamin and the territory of the tribe of Judah, is very precise, because we are here located near Jerusalem. So the author knows every place, and he gives a very detailed description of the border between the tribal inheritances of the two sites. Secondly, Eusebius of Caesarea in the early Byzantine period describes the Kiriath-jearim as being located 9 miles from Jerusalem on the way to Diospolis. Diospolis is today's Lod. And finally, we have the preservation of the name, which I like the most, because this is really fascinating. The name of the site in Arabic is Der El-Azhar. Der in Arabic is monastery. Der El-Azhar does not have any meaning in Arabic. It's not El-Azhar, which would have had some sort of meaning, but Der El-Azhar does not. But this is very easy to understand, the name, because the book of Samuel, when it tells us the story of the ark, gives us the very important detail that when the ark was brought to Kiriath-jearim, it was placed in the hands of a priest, and the name of the priest was Eleazar. So Der El-Azhar meaning the monastery of Eleazar, and probably it's a translation into Arabic of the Greek of the Byzantine monastery, the name of the Byzantine monastery, which was located there, and which, when you visit the site, you can see the remains, the mosaic floors of the Byzantine monastery under the church, which is located there today. The church was built in 1926, which means almost a century ago. So the identification is secure. Now, Kiriath-jearim in the Bible, here you can see in the picture the inheritance of the tribe of Benjamin, the Dead Sea on the right-hand side, and Kiriath-jearim with I marked it with a red rectangle. In the Bible, it appears in several places in different contexts, not only in the Ark narrative. So first of all, the border between the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the book of Joshua, and then in the lists of towns of Judah and Benjamin in Joshua, and the places listed both in Benjamin and in Judah. This is an interesting case. I'm not going to go into too many details now, but we have to bear it in mind. Then the towns of the Gibeonites, also in the book of Joshua. And of course, the migration of the tribe of Dan in the book of Judges, and in the genealogies in the book of Chronicles. So you see the whole range of texts which go back, if you wish, to the Deuteronomistic history or Deuteronomistic historian in the book of Joshua, and then all the way later to the book of Chronicles, to the genealogies, which, you know, according to most of my colleagues, should be dated to the maybe 4th century BC. In my opinion, the genealogies in the book of Chronicles depict slightly later realities, perhaps as late as the time of the Hasmoneans in the 2nd century or late 2nd century BC. Also, there is the issue of the name of the site, which is interesting. Kiriath-jearim is mentioned also as Kiryat Baal, referring to worship of the deity Baal, the Canaanite, the ancient Near Eastern, and also as Baala, and probably also as Gibeah. And there's a big question, why? Why should the place be mentioned under several names? There is dispute about it. Thomas Romer and I wrote an article a while ago trying to understand the background. There are two ways to explain this. The first one should be that Kiryat Baal is some sort of a negative description of the place in the eyes of the Judahites after the place is not any more important, let's say, or less important in the late 7th century and later, or that this was indeed the original name of the site, and then Kiriath-jearim is some sort of a later addition or a later name to the place. Now, the most important biblical material on Kiriath-jearim, and this is the one which I wish to discuss today, to tell you about, is the Ark narrative. The Ark narrative in the two books of Samuel. This block, the Ark narrative starts in the chapter number 4 in the first book of Samuel, and then it goes into 5 and 6 and the first verse of chapter 7. Then it stops and commences again in the second book of Samuel, chapter 6. And this was identified as one block possibly by a German scholar, a very important one about a century ago, as one narrative. But then there has been a big question whether we are dealing with one story or with a story and an addition. According to some scholars, the name of the German scholar was Leonard Rost. I should mention him because he was really an important scholar. He wrote his article about this in 1926, also 25-26, which means a century ago. After Leonard Rost, there have been two camps basically about the Ark narrative. One camp saying that, following Rost and saying that this is one story which commences in the 4th chapter of the first book of Samuel and then continues until the 6th chapter with a break into 2nd Samuel. And according to others, we are dealing here with an original story and an addition. So if this is so, the original story ends at Kiriath-jearim. And the addition is the one on King David coming to pick up the ark from there. So, with your permission, let me tell you the story in a very short way. For those of you maybe who, I'm sure that you all know the story, but still, those of you who do not remember the detail, the story is very dramatic. One of the really beautiful piece of prose in the book of Samuel. So once upon a time, many years ago, the ark was placed at Shiloh. In parentheses, let me tell you that when I was younger, as we said, many years ago also, not as many years ago as the ark at Shiloh, but 40 years ago, I myself excavated at Shiloh. In any event, the ark was there at Shiloh, and then the children of Israel went to battle with the Philistines at a place called Ebenezer, probably on the coast, near the coast. And when they saw the might of the Philistines, they were scared, and they sent to bring the ark in order to save them and give them victory in battle. But the God of Israel was furious with the behavior of priests at Shiloh and made the Israelites be defeated by the Philistines. They were defeated badly, and the ark was taken captive. The ark was taken captive, and the story goes that the ark was taken into the Philistine city of Ashdod on the coast. And then things started going wrong at Ashdod. They placed the ark in the temple of Dagon at Ashdod. They come the next morning, Dagon is lying on the face, fell down. They put Dagon, the statue of Dagon back. They come the next morning, again something happened with the statue of Dagon. So the Philistines understand that the ark brings a terrible calamity on the city, and they decide to get rid of it, and they send it to two other Philistine cities, Ekron and Gath, and the same happened, similar things happened there. Then the Philistines, generally speaking, decided the time has come to get rid of the ark, of the danger of the ark. And here we come to a very peculiar part of the story, because they decide to send the ark to Bet Shemesh. And Bet Shemesh is an Israelite town. Bet Shemesh is a Judahite town. So they send it to Bet Shemesh, and when the ark comes to Bet Shemesh, the God of Israel strikes the people of Bet Shemesh. So something went wrong. And we don't really very well understand from the story what went wrong. But something went wrong. The people of Bet Shemesh did not know exactly how to deal with the ark. So the people of Bet Shemesh decided to send it away. And they call on the people of Kiriath-jearim to come and take the ark. They come, they take the ark, they place it there in apparently in a temple, because they speak about the house of Abinadab, which means a temple. And then there's this priest, Eleazar. And the wonderful thing is that everything is peaceful. The ark comes to Kiriath-jearim, everybody is happy, peaceful situation, no more problems. So the ark is in its place. And Thomas Romer and I belong to those scholars who argue that this is the end of the story, basically, the original story. The story is the story which explains the establishment of Temple of the Ark at Kiriath-jearim, which means that chapter 6 in the second book of Samuel is an addition, because according to the biblical, according to the order of the story in the world of the Deuteronomistic historian, okay, let's put it this way. So all this happens at the end of the quote-unquote period of the judges, before the rise of David to power, right? And then so this is in the middle, and then when David comes to power, and when David takes over Jerusalem, he comes to Kiriath-jearim to fetch the ark. He takes the ark to Jerusalem. So this is the background of the story. The questions are the following. We, Thomas Romer and I, you probably understand this, we are not the Raiders of the Lost Ark. No Indiana Joneses there here. In fact, we are not that much interested in the ark as an object. We are interested with the story. Who wrote the story? Where, when, and why? What's the background to the story? Because the story is a fascinating one. And what's the historical setting behind the story? I must tell you that when I started excavating at Kiriath-jearim, we conducted 2 seasons at the site. You know that in parallel I work also, as you heard before, also at Megiddo, or my main project is at Megiddo. So we excavated at Kiriath-jearim twice, in 2017 and 19. When I came there in 2017, I already had in mind ideas which I formulated before regarding northern Israelite texts in the Deuteronomistic history. I'm not alone, and I'm not the first one to say this, of course. I mean, there are many good, important biblical scholars saw this before, but I belong to them. So Thomas and I suspected that we are dealing here from the beginning, and we wanted to see whether we can show this. I suspected that we are dealing with the North Israelite story because the ark comes from Shiloh. And it is also important and interesting to say, you know, that according to the centralization of cult ideas in the Bible, other temples are negatively seen in the eyes of the biblical authors, including the prophetic works of Hosea and Amos. Shiloh is not. Shiloh is not condemned. Is looked at as a legitimate temple before, because it is before the bringing of the ark, according to the idea of the Deuteronomists before the bringing of the ark to Jerusalem. So this is the background. Here's a nice picture of the site. You must admit that it's beautiful, surrounded by the village of Abu Ghosh, the Arab village around it. And you can see again the monastery and the fact that the site itself is not inhabited. And so we had in mind two goals. First of all, a large, not yet excavated site near Jerusalem, which in itself is interesting. And secondly, understanding the background for the references to the site in the Bible, especially, first and foremost, in the Ark narrative, but not only in the Ark narrative. Let me start with topography, and let me start with a little story about myself. I have to admit my misbehavior. I was traveling on the road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem all my life, and sometimes every week or every second week or whatever, and I never went to the site. I was never there. I looked also, I saw the site from afar. And then maybe 7-8 years ago, a friend of mine, Nadav Naaman, whom you know, a very close friend, told me, why don't we go one day? And because I started expressing my interest in the site. So we went together there. And when I came to the site, I said to Nadav immediately, something is wrong here. Something does not fit. Something is wrong in the sense that the top of the site is flat. And you see it very beautifully from here. This is a picture taken from north to south. And you see how flat the top. I mean, there are no hills like this in the hill country. In the hill country, a hill looks like this, with slopes, not with a flat part. This flat part is about 150 meters long from east to west and 110 or more from north to south. So the question is, what is the reason? My answer immediately was that this is impossible naturally, which means that the top of the hill is man-shaped, had been shaped in the past, had been constructed in order to prepare some sort of a platform, some sort of a podium on top of the site, in a sense, not exactly similar to the Temple Mount of Jerusalem, of course, because the Temple Mount is a Herodian project later, but it is an artificial hill anyway. So the question was that my first reaction was that my first thing to do is in order to try to prove that we have here an artificial platform, because this is the key for understanding the history of the site. So what the first thing to do was to fly a drone over the site and produce this very beautiful blue and green orthophoto, which also gives you the topography, three-dimensional sort of the hill. And it is very clear already by looking at this picture in the center that we are dealing with the site with two very large terraces, which are not normal terraces in the highlands. The one on the left, you can see it in the picture, and the one on the right. Take a look at the one on the right, which is very clear also in the orthophoto. It is about more than 100 meters long, and it goes straight. And it is exactly north-south, to the point, to the degree. Now, in the highlands, terraces are not straight. They are in the shape of the hill. And here we have a straight terrace running and about 7 meters high, something like that, running from north to south, and a parallel one in the west, so east and west. And my reaction to this was, this is all before excavations. So my reaction was that a terrace like this in the highlands cannot survive without being supported by a very massive wall inside. There is no way that it can survive the many winters, including snow, in the case of the area of Jerusalem. This year alone, I mean, only in 2022, there were 2 or 3 snowstorms, in Jerusalem, a little bit peculiar, but still. And so with erosion in the highlands, it is impossible that the terraces will stand like this without something inside, something big inside. So the next, yes, before I continue, here's a picture on the left-hand side, a very interesting one, of the hill of Kiriath-jearim. So here we are before the construction of the church. So you can see the monastery in the yellow circle, but the church is not there yet. The church is the building a little bit down the hill or a little bit to the east. And the hostel is not there yet. And this picture was taken by the Bavarian Luftwaffe, the Air Force, in the First World War. So the picture was taken in 1918. This is one of they conducted aerial pictures, carried out aerial photography in Palestine. They were among the first, if not the first, to take pictures from the air, from airplanes in the First World War. And in the picture, what we see the big terraces in the east and west, but we also see a terrace in the north, which we cannot see today anymore because of the expansion of the monastery, the convent. So this is a very important picture because it shows us that there is another big terrace in the north, not only east and west. And then we have this, again, something like an orthophoto, three-dimensional if you wish, and you can see that the elevation is the same, 753.5 all over except for the top, which is a little bit higher. But again, it gives you the notion of the flat nature of the top of the hill. So the first thing to do, this was also before excavation, to bring a team of scholars, researchers, from the Institute of Earth Science in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. A friend of mine, Amos Agnon, who is a geologist and a very prominent one, to carry out a seismic geodetic survey at the site. And indeed, we revealed that there are very big fields. We can see the original topography of the site on the right-hand side. And then the big fields, the big fields are about 5-6 meters deep on the slopes. And again, fields like this cannot survive without and not be eroded if there are no big walls which hold the entire structure of the top of the hill. Now the question was how to continue. Now we came to the point that we have to take a decision where to excavate. And as you can imagine, it's not very simple because there's this monastery there. We not only had to respect the monastery, we wanted to respect the privacy and life of the nuns and the monastery, and there is pilgrimage to the place. You cannot come just like that and start excavating, in the gardens of the convent. I mean, this is not an option, of course. So we carried out very friendly negotiations with the nuns and with the leadership of the order in Jerusalem, and finally came to a solution that we will excavate on the slope around. It was not a compromise because from my own experience at Shiloh and other places, the top of the hill in the highlands is very eroded. So even if we could carry out excavations at the summit, I very much wonder if we could really find good context, not disturbed, on top of the hill, especially in view of the big fields all around. So the solution was to excavate on the slopes, and I'm marking here the 3 areas that which we excavated. I will be focusing today on the yellow ones, which means because I'm speaking about the top, the summit of the hill. So I will be focusing on A and B, and area C is a different story. In area C, let me just give you in one sentence, we have very interesting results for late monarchic times in Judah in the 7th century BC. But what I'm going to show you on the summit is a little bit earlier, apparently, as far as I can judge, at least. And let's go and take a look at the excavations. So this is a picture of the northern area. So the northern area is on top over there, area A. And here is a picture of area A, but looking to the south, which means here we look to the north, but in this picture we look to the south. And interestingly, immediately when we started excavating, we found a big wall. The wall that it was almost too good. I must tell you something. I must tell you my experience in archaeology. I always looked around me and I saw my colleagues going to excavate at sites. They came with a theory, and it was very easy for them to prove the theory. I went to sites always, and the results were always contradicting to my theories. So I had to say to myself, what's wrong with me? There were only two possibilities. One possibility was that I'm stupid, and it was not very good for me to follow. Another possibility is too harsh to explain, so I'm leaving it aside. But here I find myself in a situation that I myself come to a site with a theory, and I prove the theory in the first day of excavations. So I was walking around and I said to my students, something is wrong. Something is wrong with me or with the site. It's impossible that I will get such positive answers immediately. And indeed, when I started looking at the details, I noticed that the pottery is a little bit, well, one could say that the whole structure is from a later period, like Hellenistic or Roman. It's a possibility. The pottery was here with this big wall, with this big structure on the Hellenistic early Roman side. So it was disappointing. So after a moment that I was kind of confused that I'm okay and I have my theory proven and so on, I saw that it's not that simple. But then we went back to the picture of the Bavarian Luftwaffe. And I saw that we have some sort of a mistake of a few meters, apparently. And that the terrace that you can see over here, this one on top, is the expansion of the monastery. And that what I see in the Bavarian photo is probably there, a little bit away. So this is the picture from 2017, and then, surprise, 2019. We opened to the south, and immediately we fell upon the big wall from the Iron Age, a big wall from the Iron Age, which I mark here in yellow. Very big one, very massive one. And so this is the one from the Iron Age. We don't have the inner face because it is under the modern terrace. We have the outer face, and this is the Hellenistic Roman wall, farther to the north, oriented in the same way. Now the question was how to date the wall, this one, the bigger wall, to the south. So this was not very difficult because we decided, first of all, to take part of the wall apart, to dismantle part of the wall and extract the pottery from within the courses. And the pottery within the courses was showed us that we are dealing with something which was constructed apparently in the 8th century BC. Without going into too many details and too much terminology, archaeology terminology. And then we also extracted pottery from the earth support debris, which support the big wall. And it gave us the same result, which means there was no pottery even of the 7th century. That is to say that the wall is earlier than the 7th century, and the latest pottery in the wall, the pieces were from the apparently beginning of the Iron 2B, which means 8th century BC. Okay? And then the later wall, which you see here, the Hellenistic Roman one, is a different story altogether, and I will get back to it at the end of the presentation. So this was one area. Now I'm turning to the other area in the east, the big terraces. If you remember, in the east, you can see the continuation of the terrace over there. And once we opened the terrace, we came across a very big, massive wall, which was expected because otherwise the terrace would not have survived the winters of the highlands. And here you can see how it is also eroded in the direction of the slope. So this is this area in the east in 2017, and then we expanded in 2019, and we have a very nice piece of architecture there from the for the support wall, which was built in the east, and the outer face of the support wall here on the right-hand side. Now, here the situation is more complex, more complicated than in the north. Because in the north, there was an Iron Age wall, and then in the Hellenistic early Roman period, they constructed another one in parallel a few meters to the north. However, here in the east, the renovation is of the same wall. So there's the Iron Age wall, apparently, I'll show you in a minute, which was renovated a little later, and we can see it even in the architecture. And what we do see is that there are drafted stones reused in the renovation of the big wall. Now, so we have the evidence for the wall in the terrace in the east and the wall in the terrace in the north. In the west, no way to work. It's too harsh. The slope is too difficult, and there is a school there, and we could not work in the west, but it was clear to us because of the orientation that there is a big wall there. The question was, what is the situation in the south? Now, the south side of the site is a little bit tricky because we calculated that the southern wall must be located where the parking lot of the convent is. So it was not a very good idea to come to the convent and tell them, listen, we want to take apart your parking lot. So we have to find another solution. We can see, in fact, here the beginning of the southern wall over here, but we wanted to see what was going on here. So we again turned to our friends from the Institute of Earth Science at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and we carried out a ground-penetrating radar investigation here. And what you see is the result. The result is very clear, that the ground-penetrating radar was the technique was able to detect a big wall under the parking lot, like maybe a meter deep or even less, which goes exactly in the line that we suspected that the old wall, the ancient wall, must be located. So we have the whole picture now, and the picture is clear that we are dealing with a platform on the summit of the hill, supported by huge walls, 4 meters wide, as we see in the east and in the north. And inside, we have a situation of the hill, okay, and then the support wall, and then fields, in order to create the platform, the big platform. The big platform is 150 meters east-west and 110 north-south, exactly to the point. Now the question was, again, as I told you, to date it properly. So in the north, the situation was clear. That according to pottery, in the north, the old support wall can be dated by the pottery finds when we dismantled part of it, and by the support debris to the first half of the 8th century, as far as I know my pottery. And I know my pottery quite well, I think. The question was how to date the wall on the east, which was more complicated, you remember, because of the later renovations. So what to do in this area? In this area, we did not, it was too difficult for us to dismantle the wall, and we had to find another solution. So this is what we turned to. We turned to optically stimulated luminescence. Let me tell you what it is in one sentence. You know probably that there are several physics-related dating techniques. The best known is radiocarbon. And you probably know that I'm very into radiocarbon dating. The problem is that in order to have a proper scheme or system of radiocarbon dating, you need good floors connecting to the walls in order to radiocarbon date the organic material on the floors with pottery that you know what you're doing. And here we don't have this situation because we are already under the floors on the slope, because there was, after all, some sort of erosion on the hill. So we turn to another technique, another method, optically stimulated luminescence. What is it? Optically stimulated luminescence gives you the last time that particles of quartz in the debris between the courses and stones in the wall were exposed to sunlight. And it gives it to you in relatively big uncertainty. So you know, in radiocarbon, you can reach today uncertainty of 30 years, back on 3,000 years, which is amazing. This is not the case here. We have uncertainty of 200-300 years. However, this is a good enough uncertainty in order to decide between Iron Age and Hellenistic, for instance, or Iron Age and early Roman. So this is the technique that we chose, and we did this with a researcher from the Geological Survey of Israel. She is a really world-class scholar, researcher in this method of optically stimulated luminescence. Now, here are the results for the lower courses in the East. Because the upper courses, we know already that there is renovation there. Okay, we saw before. The lower courses, you can see in the red on the left-hand side, and you can see that the span is big. We are dealing here with the range between, let's say, 1300 and a little bit after 800 BC. So it's a big uncertainty. In each of the results, there is a smaller uncertainty, but altogether, the uncertainty is even bigger. So what to do in a situation like this? So before I am telling you, let me tell you something in advance in order to prevent myself the trouble later. We are not on safe ground here, I have to admit. We are not on safe ground. I prefer to date according to pottery, assemblage, on floor, with radiocarbons samples. You know, at Megiddo, for instance, we are bombarding the site with radiocarbon samples. We have altogether until now, I don't know how many, and I cannot even tell you how much it was it cost to date them. Maybe 150, 160 more, 170 or 80 samples altogether so far. This is not the case here, so we have to work with what we have. That's it. The site is difficult to decipher. But now I'm going to do the following. I'm going to incorporate the results of the optically stimulated luminescence with what we know on the settlement history of the site. How do we know about the settlement history of the site? From surveys which were conducted at the site previously, and you heard about it before, by Gabriel Barkai, Rescue Excavations, by Amir Feldstein, who was my student, by Boaz Zissou and others. And this is a big collection of pottery, and when I look at the pottery, I see the following. That the site was inhabited from early times, from the Bronze Age, starting in the 3rd millennium BC, continuing into the 2nd millennium, which means early bronze, middle bronze, late bronze, Iron 1, but very weak. Habitation was small. It was a very small village. The same for the Iron 2A, let's say in the 9th century. And then all of a sudden, boom, big expansion. And it comes in the beginning of the 8th century. This is what we see in the pottery collection. We see in the pottery of the site two major settlement periods of activity, periods of settlement activity. One in the Iron 2 BC, which means 8th and 7th centuries BC, and the other one in the Hellenistic early Roman, with some sort of a break, not continuous. Now, if we take this into consideration, it is clear that a small settlement, a poor settlement, could not have produced this huge monument on the summit. So we have to brush aside the possibility of late bronze, Iron 1, Iron 2A, and we are left with a very narrow slot in the first half of the 8th century. This is in fact, and it fits what we see in the pottery from the other area. So altogether, I think, let me put it this way, we are not in an ideal situation here, but I think that we are on safe ground, which means I think that we can say that the big structure originally was constructed in the first half of the 8th century. Let me give you one more clue for this. You remember the drafted stones in the renovation. Drafted stones like this appear in the land of Israel, in the southern Levant, in the 9th and 8th centuries BC, mainly in the territory of the northern kingdom of Israel. So Megiddo, Hatzor, Dan, and so on. Then in the Hellenistic period, but Hasmonean. And then in the early Roman. Now, let's play a little bit. Here you see on the right-hand side, Dan, Megiddo, Samaria, with similar construction. Let's play a game, a small game. Okay? So it is not likely that an early Roman, let's say Herodian structure was dismantled in order to renovate the walls there. It's too close. The Hasmonean period is missing. So it is more likely that we are dealing with blocks that come from an Iron Age building. And if it's Iron Age building, it's a building which, and especially in the context of the 8th century, the beginning of the 8th century, it reminds one of architecture in the Northern Kingdom, in Israel, and not in Judah. So let's make some sort of a small summary here. Here's the situation. This is how we understand. This is how I understand. You see, I have a little bit of imagination, as you see. But this is how Thomas Roman, the French television network Arte, made a film on our excavation at Kiriath-jearim with a very good friend, a director, Thierry Ragobert, a very successful one. The film won prizes in documentary festivals and so on. So for the documentary, they made this nice reconstruction, how we see the summit compound and the village or the town around it. Okay, so a summit compound in the 8th century BC. So now the question is, how to understand it? There are basically three possibilities in the first half of the 8th century. First possibility, Northern Kingdom. Second, Assyria. I'll say a few words about it. Third, Judah. Okay, forget about Judah. Judah, according to the way I understand, sorry again, Judah in the first half of the 8th century is not strong enough to carry out something like that. It does not have the resources, neither the manpower nor the economic resources to carry out something like that, not to mention that there is no parallel construction in Judah like this in the first half of the 8th century. Judah becomes stronger and more successful and more economically prospering, starting when it was incorporated into the Assyrian realm after Tiglath-Pileser III, okay, after 732 BC. So we are left, if I'm not wrong here, we are left with Israel and with Assyria. Now, we Israelis drive from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem today, and each Israeli that I would pose the question to him or her, where are we here at Kiriath-jearim? The answer would be, of course, in Judah. But this is not the case, because Benjamin is a northern tribe according to the biblical tradition. And we are here on the southern end of the Benjaminite territory. So we are on the border, in fact, between Israel and Judah, at least in certain way of looking at it. Okay, on the border between Benjamin and Judah, which means the border, in a way, between Israel and Judah. Is it possible that it was constructed by the Assyrians? Here's a nice podium at the site of Busera in Edom, which is an important place, and apparently the headquarters of the Assyrian domination over Edom and the promotion of trade along the Arabian trade route and so on and so forth. Southern Jordan today. However, in Judah, on the border there with Judah and Israel, I cannot see an Assyrian project like this before Sennacherib, which means not before 701. And 701 is already too late for the archaeology, for the results of the excavation. So we are not in 701, we are earlier. So we should also brush aside Assyria. And we are left with the Northern Kingdom. We are left with Israel. And here are some pictures that I took many years ago, flying over the capital of the Northern Kingdom, Samaria. And I also later wrote about this. Samaria, the Northern Kingdom, they have elevated compounds like this. First and foremost at Samaria, which you can see over here, which is a big site, a very beautiful one, a very special one. but also in other places. I think also maybe to a certain extent at Hatzor. And of course, there are several sites in Transjordan, and there's Jezreel also with some sort of a compound like this. So in the northern kingdom, this is relatively well known, and we have to turn our eyes, in fact, to the northern kingdom, that is to say, to Israel. This is also a reconstruction of Samaria to show you how, in my opinion, it looks quite similar to what we see at Kiriath-jearim. So now let's take a look at the northern kingdom. I'm taking you step by step, okay? Northern kingdom. So we are in the first half of the 8th century, and we are in the northern kingdom. The most important ruler, king of Israel, is Jeroboam II. He ruled for 40 more years, 40 plus years in the northern kingdom. And I think that here we have a very interesting moment that we can take a look at an Israelite monarch on the right-hand side. So say hello to Jeroboam II, maybe. This is a fresco from the site of Kuntilet Ajrud. Here it is, we can see it. Although the site is in the south, in the northeastern part of the Sinai, it belongs to the northern kingdom according to its material culture, language of the inscription of the text found there, and so on. So this is a plaster scene. We see a monarch sitting on a throne in a site which belongs to the northern kingdom in the first half of the 8th century. Who could he be? I mean, probably a monarch, perhaps Jeroboam II, who made Israel some sort of a mini empire. At his time, he expanded the borders of the northern kingdom. There are clues to this in different parts of chronistic materials in the biblical texts. Of course, archaeology is not strong enough to show this, but we see this, I think, in the biblical text. So we are in the first half of the 8th century in the time of Jeroboam II. Now, here is a nice view of Israel and Judah with Kiriath-jearim near Jerusalem here. Here's Kiriath-jearim. Jerusalem is here, Kiriath-jearim is here. And we can see the ark narrative. So the narrative starts in the north at Shiloh, in the north. Then the battle was pitched not so far apparently from Afek. And then Philistine, Ashdod, and Bet Shemesh. And one needs to ask, what is the story in the ark narrative? It is first and foremost the founding story for the Temple of the Ark, in my opinion, at Thomas and me, at the Temple of the Ark at Kiriath-jearim. But there is more to that. First, it is also mockery of Ashdod. It is a mockery of Ashdod. What they are saying to Ashdod, your God is no good. Look at you. This is your God? You know, falling on the face in the temple of Dagon because of the power of the God of Israel. Your God is no good. And they are making fun. They are mocking the God of Ashdod, the deity of Ashdod. And also, there is some sort of an open account with Judah because of Bet Shemesh. Okay, because they say the Bet Shemeshites, they don't know how to deal with the ark. They are no good also. Remember, please, that a few years before Jeroboam II came to the throne, a battle was pitched at Bet Shemesh. We read about it in two chronistic verses in the chapter 14 of the second book of Kings. Joash, the father of Jeroboam, defeated Amaziah, the king of Judah, at Bet Shemesh, and then the text says that he broke the wall of Jerusalem, meaning he made Jerusalem a vassal of the northern kingdom. So we are dealing here with the situation of Jeroboam II establishing a mini empire, ruling over the northern kingdom and the territories of the north and the south together, with one of the aims to expand along the coast to the very lucrative trade of the south. And the two cities which block this expansion are Bet Shemesh and Ashdod. Bet Shemesh Judahite, Ashdod Philistine. So they make a mockery of the two places. And Thomas and me think that the story of the bringing of the ark to Kiriath-jearim which is the original story, and it ends at Kiriath-jearim, is a story of the founding of a temple there, Temple of the Ark, as a manifestation of the rule of the Northern Kingdom over this territory, and then, of course, also domination of Judah. I also think this is something that we can discuss later if there are questions. I'll be finishing in a minute. I also think that there are other locations in the territory of the Northern Kingdom with the temples dedicated to what we describe today as biblical traditions, which were the founding traditions and the heroic traditions of the Northern Kingdom. Think about Penuel of Jacob, think about Bethel of Jacob, think about Gilgal of the conquest, think about this one as the Temple of the Ark, and there are more. So this is the background as far as Thomas and I understand it. And already in the first half of the 8th century, for the first time, Amon Avi, in my opinion, we have the capability of producing biblical text. Because we have the first evidence for literary production in Israel is in the first half of the 8th century, and we can see here on the left-hand side down, this is the Samaria, this is the Samaria Ostrakon, but below, and literary text from Kuntilet Ajrut, and on the right-hand side, you probably know it, this is the Balaam inscription from Tel Der Allah, which is in the territory of the Northern Kingdom. We can argue about the language, but forget it, it's in the territory of the Northern Kingdom. So there is the ability to produce literary text. And this is the famous seal of Shema, the servant of Jeroboam from Megiddo, found in the German excavations in the beginning of the 20th century. So was the monumental platform constructed by Israel during the reign of Jeroboam II as a domination center over Judah in general and Jerusalem in particular, and a symbol of a united monarchy ruled from Samaria. So I heard before my description as an enfant terrible. I'm not an enfant anymore, so how can I be terrible? I'm an old guy. So 30 years ago, I could have been described as an enfant terrible, but not anymore. So you probably know that I don't think that the description of a great united monarchy of the time of David and Solomon ruled from Jerusalem is an historical one. I think that this description is a description of a great united monarchy to be. It comes from the ideology, Josianic ideology of the late 7th century of King Josiah. But I think today that the story is told on the background of knowledge in Jerusalem that not too long before there was actually a united monarchy, but it was ruled from Samaria, not from Jerusalem. And this is the beginning of the story as far as I can judge. So this is also, as I told you, the geography of the ark narrative. Now, just to finish this is to put the spotlight on one more issue. This is the Hellenistic fortification of the site, as I mentioned before, dating to the Ptolemaic period in the 3rd century BC. So it is not Seleucid. In the beginning, we thought maybe that it is Seleucid, but now you see all of us looking at the pottery at Tel Aviv University and understanding that we are dealing with Ptolemaic structure. And then also we see a renovation of the place in the early Roman period, and we know that apparently it was a location of a Roman camp during the campaign of the Romans against the first Jewish revolt, which means the conquest of Jerusalem in the 1st century CE. The best proof is to be seen in the church. 2 inscriptions found at the site, one of them of the 10th Legion. There is another one of the 10th Legion in Abu Ghosh, in the Crusader church in Abu Ghosh. There is another one. And this one, the bigger one, the longer one, mentions Sextus Lucilius Bassus, who was the governor of Jerusalem in 71 to 73. So there was a renovation of the site, probably in order to make it possible to station part of a Roman legion there. So we can also see similarity in the function of the site. Look at this beautiful place, looking now to the west and seeing the Mediterranean in the background. We see that it functioned as the domination post over the road to Jerusalem in the Iron Age, Iron 2B, in the Hellenistic period, in the Roman period, and the highway is also there today. So we see similarity in the history of this very interesting and beautiful site. Thank you. תודה, בשמחה.
Tenemos las preguntas o algún comentario que alguien quiera hacer. Tope hasta las 7:30. Hasta las 7:30 preguntas, tenemos. Okay. English.
Hi, Professor Finkelstein. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you if you have any thoughts on how to relate this platform, this structure, to the Tel Motza temple near Jerusalem. Let me translate it, maybe. Lo digo. Que le pregunto al profesor que cómo relacionaría lo que ha encontrado con un yacimiento que se ha encontrado hace no mucho, un templo en Tel Motza, cerca de Jerusalén.
Yeah, this is a very good and intriguing question. The Temple of Motza is being now re-excavated. Motza is a site which is located 5 kilometers between Kiriath-jearim and Jerusalem, midway about, and something like 5 kilometers from Jerusalem. And a few years ago, a building was excavated there and proven to be a temple by Shua Kiselevich, who writes now her PhD thesis at Tel Aviv University. And now they resumed the excavations, Shua herself and my friend, colleague Oded Lipschitz at the site, in order to better study the history, because the first excavation was a rescue, salvage excavation, and now they do a more elaborate work at the site. Now, first of all, let me say that the site may be connected to the second part of the story. I did not mention, I finished the lecture, with the ark at Kiriath-jearim, but then there is the story of King David coming and taking the ark to Jerusalem. Of course, the ark was not taken in 10th century from this place, because the ark was probably, had there been an ark, and if we follow the story and the logic of archaeology and the logic of biblical exegesis, the way we understand the story, we are in the first half of the 8th century, so we are 200 years after David. So the story of David coming to fetch the ark is a later story, or by the Deuteronomistic historian. Now, here's the first place where Thomas and me do not agree. There's only one place where we do not agree. Thomas thinks that the story of David coming to fetch the ark is Josianic, and I think that maybe it's a little bit earlier. So here you see me as some sort of more conservative in my approach. S'arrive, as they say in French. It happens. And then anyway, the temple at Motza may be related to the second part of the story, because if you remember, there is this story that they take the ark from Kiriath-jearim, something goes wrong on the way, the God of Israel strikes them again, and then they put the ark somewhere in a temple on halfway between Kiriath-jearim to Jerusalem. Very interesting story. The question is, to answer you, the temple at Motza is from the 9th century. It is Iron 2A, so it is earlier than Kiriath-jearim construction. But the big question is how long it continued to function after. And this is something that I'm waiting to see from the new excavations. The way I understand it, 9th century, maybe a little bit later, but not into the late 8th century. So we need to wait farther in order to better understand the situation there. Yes, please.
Well, first of all, thank you also from me. Sorry, my spoken English is shit, so
Yeah.
I'm not very good at this. But there are many things, many questions that come to my mind, but I cannot elaborate on them because I have not elaborated on them in my own brain. So, but there is just something that interests me because some years ago I read an article. I don't remember if by Thomas Römer alone or by both of you about the Jacob traditions and the
two of us together.
Yes. So thank you. So and the origins of the sanctuary of Bethel and the way that all the evidence pointed to an reenactment or an erection as we know it, also in the time of Jeroboam II. So could it be possible, in case that this platform may have been somehow related to some cultic function? I don't know how certain that may be, but in that case, could it be credited to the same, say, monumental building program, but this king, in order to affirm his own power and his own, say, theology of power and so on? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I think that you're on the right track. I think, according to my understanding, so we look alike. We think alike about these things. Let me put it this way. I think that I published a book 2 months ago in Germany under the title, what is the title? Essays on Biblical Historiography from Jeroboam II to John Hyrcanus. I think, so this again shows you how deeply I am interested with Jeroboam II in his time, the first half of the 8th century. By the way, in parenthesis, I should tell you that one of the main effort this coming season at Megiddo is going to be on the first half of the 8th century. We will see what's going to happen. I think that there was some sort of a major revolution in the Northern Kingdom, or major change in the Northern Kingdom in his time. I see it in some places. For instance, at Megiddo, I see something very interesting, that there was a major temple at the site, let's say until the 9th century. And then in the 9th century, the main temple did not survive, was abolished, and cult was centralized into the main government building at the site, which means that the dynasty is putting the hand on the cult, of course. They want to run the cult, not the local people. I think also in parallel that in the time of Jeroboam II, there was a major effort of constructing identity of the Northern Kingdom, elaborating on the heroic tales of the Northern Kingdom, on the royal traditions of the Northern Kingdom, maybe putting them in writing, the way at least I try to understand it. Thomas, I think, also agrees with me one way or the other. And this is why I mentioned in the lecture that I think that there is evidence for several such big sanctuaries. So the temple, the construction of the podium at Kiriath-jearim is for the temple of the Ark. We don't know because we have nothing on top, unfortunately, but this is an interpretation, of course. You have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Okay. Now, I don't know whether you have been to Penuel. You know, I have eyes not too bad for archaeology. And when I look at Penuel, I was there several times. There is also a podium there for a temple. There are two sites on both sides of the Jabbok River. One of them is the city, Machanaim, and the other one is only a temple, in my opinion. This is the temple of Penuel. And this is a temple which was devoted to the tradition of Jacob in the Gilead. So all this makes one big picture of, effort in the Northern Kingdom to establish its identity and to promote its importance when it became some sort of an important player on the stage of the Southern Levant in the first half of the 8th century.
Thank you for your excellent lecture.
I can't hear you very well.
Thank you for your excellent lecture. I wonder, in your book, The Bible Unearthed, you mentioned the King Henry and also his son Akkad as being or are playing a main role in the building of the North State of Israel. Do they have any of them any function in all what you have explained to us, or is just a coincidence?
I don't think they have a role at Kiriath-jearim, but you're right. There are two phases of prosperity in the Northern Kingdom. First half is in the time of the Omride dynasty, in the first half of the 8th century, and second time in the time of the later Nimshides, which means Joash and Jeroboam II in the first half of the 8th century. In between, we have a phase of domination of Damascus. So the game in the Levant was between the local powers, where Damascus and Israel, and one is up and the other one is down and so on, with Assyria looking from afar, okay, in the beginning from afar and later taking over. So at Samaria, for instance, the construction is Omride, I think, and at Chatzor, I think also, at Megiddo, I think also, Jezreel also. The two fortresses in Moab, also Omride, because we have them recorded in the Meshach Stele, in the Moabite stone, which is now in the Louvre in Paris. But in all these places, there is also a very important phase of the time of Jeroboam II. But there is a change between the two phases. Let me give you an answer and leave you with a question mark, because it's always good to live with a question mark, I think.
Yes.
Okay? So, for instance, surprisingly, I think, there is no evidence, unlike what you read in the newspapers recently, there is no evidence for scribal activity in the Northern Kingdom in the first half of the 9th century. In the territory of the Northern Kingdom, I don't know what will happen with this Ebal thing, we will see. I don't know, you read about it probably in the newspapers. Journalists contacted me to ask me about it. I told him, I can tell you one thing. My strong advice, free of charge. Do not sell your house in order to gamble on this. This was my advice to the journalist. No, not to sell the house, not yet. So we will see. But a part of this, in the territory of the Northern Kingdom, there is almost no evidence for ability to compose text. Whereas in the 8th century, this changes dramatically. We see the Samaria Ostraka, we see at Bet She'an, we see at Kuntilet Ajrud in the Sinai, all the Northern Kingdom and so on. So there is a difference between the two phases of prosperity of the Northern Kingdom. Now, I don't want to say here that there was no possibility to conduct some sort of, administrative recording in the first half of the 8th century, because it doesn't make sense. But we don't see the evidence. And we definitely do not see ability or wish to compose text, okay, literary text. I'm not speaking about a letter here and letter there, let's say, not in the north, in nearby areas. And this changes dramatically in the first half of the 8th century. And also we have for the first time, ability to identify the script as Hebrew. So there is a change. But yes, I mean, some of the features that we see at Kiriath-jearim started to appear at the time of the home rights. So you're right about it.
Bueno, última pregunta por tiempo.
As far as I have understood, you have elaborated that the northern and southern kingdoms were a later elaboration, no, in the time of Jeroboam or later on. My question is the following: the first temple of Solomon, did it ever exist? And if it did exist, do we know where it is?
So, yes, it did. I think it did exist, and I'll tell you, we have no way to find out because we cannot excavate it in Temple Mount, right? For cultural and political reasons. Better like that, huh? Not to start World War III in Jerusalem. So there's no way to excavate in the Temple Mount, so we don't. So how is it that why am I saying that there was a temple? So this comes from interpretation and my understanding of the bigger picture. I do not agree. I do not think that there was a great united monarchy in the time of David and Solomon, but I do think that David and Solomon are historical. There's no logic otherwise, okay? And also David is mentioned as the house of David in the Tel Dan inscription. So there's no logic otherwise. So there was a kingdom in Judah, and the center was Jerusalem, the capital. And what we see in all capitals, first of all, of city-states in the Bronze Age, like Hatzor or Megiddo and other places, and then in the capitals of the territorial kingdoms of the Iron Age, we see always a capital equipped with a palace and a dynastic temple, a dynastic shrine. So I don't see a reason to think that Jerusalem was the only exception on the face of the earth. So this is why I'm saying that yes, there was, and also because of the Second Temple and so on. I mean, there are many reasons. Now, where to look for it? In the Temple Mount. Can we look for it? No, because of the political reasons. Had we been able to look for it, would we find the evidence? My answer, no. Why? Because of the huge construction conducted there in the time of Herod the Great. The leveling and the filling and the preparation for the Second Temple, in my opinion, eradicated everything that was there, or almost everything that was there before. So I don't think that there is really, a chance to, even if it would have been possible to conduct excavation there to find, remains of the first temple.
Bueno, tenemos que terminar aquí. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much for your lecture and for your visit. And enjoy Madrid. Él está de vacaciones aquí unos días y no le vamos a cansar más. Así que muchas gracias y buenas tardes a todos.
Thank you very much. Thanks.